Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All together now. Narayana Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamashloke Bhakti Bhavati Naishtaki Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militandena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai. So, welcome to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. We're reading from Canto 1, Chapter 18. We're covering 24 to 50. That's quite a few verses. It's going to be finishing up this chapter entitled Parikshit Cursed by a Brahmin Boy. So rather than have everyone read, because it's a lot of verses and it's going to take a lot of time, I'll just kind of paraphrase the story here. So we've been hearing about Maharaj Parikshit, how his glories. What are some of the glories of Maharaj Parikshit? What are some of the things that he did that was really amazing? Yes, Rasika Vu.
His prowess and by his great devotional service, he was able to keep at bay Kali Yuga significantly, so that society was, prosperous and peaceful across the globe.
Right. Yeah. So that he's extremely powerful, right? It's the beginning of Kali Yuga, and Kali is about to, enact his nefarious objectives, and Maharaj Parikshit is like, nope, that's not happening. Not with me around. Vaninath Prabhu?
What does that look like? Like it mentions there that in what was mentioned is correct, but I'm just wondering, what does that look like in terms of, is it because of his, when you say powerful, etc., how does that manifest?
Well, the way the pastime shows it is that he was going to kill Kali personified. So, but then he gave on Kali's appeal for mercy and for shelter somewhere, and then he said, okay, you can reside in these places. Mm-hmm. So it means that, by his devotional power, by his empowerment from the Lord, he's able to keep Kali at bay. He's able to restrain the influence that Kali can have on society. Okay, so Maharaj Parikshit was a great personality. And now we're going to see in this chapter how, because we often hear, did you want to say something?
It really struck out to me that even though Kali was such a vicious person, and he was in front of him, he had cut the 3 legs off the bull, still Maharaj Parikshit was like compassionate to him. Like he spoke with him with kindness. It still gave him some place to stay instead of killing him. And in one verse, he's telling that I have inherited the line of Arjuna. You're fortunate that I have inherited this line, so you have no reason to fear, because we have come from very like compassionate, like generous kings.
Good, yeah. Yeah, so he had this both sides. He wasn't just, a powerful, ruthless ruler, but he was actually compassionate. He was a devotee. He was a Mahabhagavat. Lord Krishna personally saved his life when he was in the womb of his mother. When he was born, he was just looking, his name Parikshit means the examiner, because he's just examining the world to try to find that personality who saved him. He was such a devotee like that. So, but now we're going to hear, and we hear how the reason that the Bhagavatam was spoken was the context in which it was spoken is it's spoken to Maharaj Parikshit, who was cursed to die. And then he renounced everything. He went to hear Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadeva Goswami. So today we're going to hear the story about how that happened. How did this great personality, Maharaj Parikshit, get cursed to die by being bitten by a snake bird? Such a horrible way to die also. So this section starts off once upon a time. Hearing story, once upon a time. So Maharaj Parikshit, he was out hunting, as was the custom of kings in those days, because kings in those days, they didn't just sit on the throne and give orders, but they actually would fight. If there was a battle, they would be leading the charge. So they needed to be, hunting was a way that they practiced their shooting skills. It was a way that they developed fitness and, what do you call it? Like just physical strength, because you're out in the countryside. It was like austerity. They got a lot of strength and refined their skills that way. So he was hunting and he was very thirsty. He'd been walking around for a long time, all day, and he was very thirsty, and he was looking for a spring or a river or someplace to drink, and he couldn't find one, and his thirst was getting worse and worse. And finally he came across the ashram of this very well-known sage named Shamika Rishi. So Shamika Rishi, he was a very great personality himself. It's described that when Maharaj Parikshit saw him, he was sitting there in meditation. He was with his eyes closed, back straight, totally absorbed. And to the extent that it says here that all of his senses, indriya, senses, prana, the air of respiration, mana, mind, and buddhim, intelligence, were all inactive. They were all restrained. So, in Bhagavad Gita, where we hear about how the yogi merges the ingoing breath with the outgoing breath and comes to the stage of like equilibrium where their breathing totally stops. So he wasn't breathing. He was in that state of such a deep state of trance that he wasn't even breathing. Everything was just completely inactive. His mind wasn't doing anything. His intelligence was not engaged. He was there, and it said that he achieved the state of Param Brahma Bhutam. So Brahma Bhuta means the transcendental platform. Prabhupada translates it. He achieved the transcendental position qualitatively equal with the supreme absolute. So that's like a very deep state of meditative trance. He was sitting there. So that's the condition in which Maharaj saw him. Maharaj Parikshit saw him. And so the king, he was very thirsty. So as soon as he saw the sage, he asked him for some water. Now, of course, the sage, because he was so deeply absorbed in his meditation, he didn't even notice that Maharaj Parikshit was there. And so obviously he didn't respond. He didn't offer him water, nor a seat, nor any sweet words, all the things that you're supposed to offer a guest. And Maharaj Parikshit, being ignored like that, he made an assumption. He assumed that Shamika Rishi was pretending, that he was just pretending to be in trance just to avoid receiving him. So then he got angry. He's like, doesn't he know that I'm the king? And anyways, I'm a guest. Even if I was just an absolute nobody, he should have come to his house. Uninvited guests should be received as a representative of God. And so he got angry. And then there was a dead snake that was lying around the grounds of the ashram. He saw that, and he took a stick and he picked up the snake and he put it over the shoulders of Shamika Rishi. And still, Shamika Rishi was still absorbed in trance. He didn't even notice. He just was, in meditation. Okay, so then, but what happened was somebody that was there went to tell the son of Shamiki Rishi that, this king came along and he threw this dead snake on your father, and what are you going to do about that? And so the boy, his name was Shringi, he was just a kid. He was just like maybe 10, 12 years old. And he was like, nobody does that to my father. I'm going to show him. So then, and he's also, it's described that he's showing off in front of his friends. He was like playing with a bunch of his friends, and he was like, nobody messes with my family kind of thing, and I'm going to show all my friends how cool I am, how tough I am, how powerful I am as a Brahmin. And then he just went and touched water and, ripped his Brahmin thread, and he uttered a curse. Well, first, before he did that, he hurled out some insults. So what he says, aho, means like, what's going on? Like, what the heck is going on? Aho. Word to word, aho. What the hell? Aho. He says, aho adharma palanam. So palanam means the kings who are supposed to protect the people. He says, what adharma? What such irreligion? How is it that the kings who are supposed to protect the citizens are acting in such sinful ways? He said, this Maharaj Parikshit, he's just like a crow. He's just, crows eat the dead bodies of he's just like a crow, or he's like a watchdog. Actually, he says the kings are like watchdogs because they're just supposed to protect everybody. And like dogs, a dog should never enter the house, especially of a Brahmin. So how is it that he stepped foot inside the house of my father, who's such an exalted Brahmin, and contaminated the whole place? Doesn't he know his place? I'm going to show him his place right now. I'm going to show him who's more powerful. He thinks he's the emperor of the world. He thinks that he's the boss here. Forget it. The Brahmins are higher. And then he, so saying all that, then he touched water. He got his Brahmin thread, and he uttered this curse, that on the 7th day from today, a snake bird will bite the most wretched one of that dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, because of his having broken the laws of etiquette by insulting my father. Okay, so there are a few things here that strike me as being anomalous so I want you to tell me what those are. So first of all, in regards to Maharaj Parikshit, in regards to Shamika Rishi, and also Shringi, they've all done something wrong, it seems. So what's going on here? Kartikeya.
Yeah, why would Maharaj Parikshit put a snake on someone?
Right? Yeah, we're just talking about how such a great devotee he is, how compassionate he is.
Yeah, it's like he let his intrusive thoughts just kind of take action.
Yeah, so he's just like acting somewhat on the caliber, like an ordinary schmo would do that, right? But, kind of like tit for tat. Well, if he's going to be rude to me, then I'm going to be rude to him too, just see who can be the ruder person here. But Maharaj Parikshit wasn't a rude person, he was a refined, cultured, pure devotee, and he just like acted like a low-class person, who couldn't control his mind and senses. So that's very anomalous. What does anomalous mean? It means out of the ordinary. It's unexpected. Something else? Kameshi.
He was assuming the Brahmana didn't pay attention to his need. So he didn't kind of like take care of that.
Okay, yeah, so it also is very out of character for him to make that kind of negative assumption. Like generally a devotee overlooks the faults of others and focuses on the good qualities. So it was totally unnatural for him to just jump to that conclusion that this Rishi's, he's just purposefully ignoring me. He's just faking a trance so that he doesn't have to get me water. It's just like, it's kind of almost ridiculous, that someone would think that. Yeah. And what else? Christina?
So the Brahmanas are supposed to be the ones who,
uphold the Vedic customs and laws and advise others, and they're supposed to be humble and advise the kings. And also we know that if you're like a pujari and you're doing arti and then but a devotee comes in and nobody else is there to receive them, you should like pause your arti and go and receive the devotee, and that's kind of the higher principle. But the Muni didn't do any of those things. Like he being so wise and so knowledgeable and having the larger perspective about the Vedic principles, he really should have received the king.
Yeah, so he really should have received the king. And I was thinking that if Shamika Rishi was so absorbed in trance on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then why didn't the Supreme Personality of Godhead inspire him from within his heart with the knowledge that there's a great personality, who's coming now? Because you know how this happens all the time with us, like I was like walking in the driveway of Urban Farm at Houston, Krishna House, Houston, and I was like absorbed in my japa, my eyes closed, walking on the driveway. And then all of a sudden something just told me to stop and look. And there was a poisonous snake that was like 2 feet in front of me, like the second most poisonous snake in the world. And I would have I would have directly stepped on it, like in the next second. So, and that happens all the time, like dangerous situations, like all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, I need to pay attention here. And then you realize afterwards why you needed to pay attention, but it's coming from the Paramatma. So why didn't the Paramatma tell him, like, Maharaj Parikshit, great devotees coming. This is a great opportunity for sadhu sangha, and but that didn't happen. And also the other thing is that, okay, how is Shringi wrong? Advaita.
One more thing about his father. The father, you would teach your children, and maybe as a father he has failed to say, hey, whatever happens, never use the trigger in a negative way, never curse. So the power was there, but maybe as a father he has failed to caution his child, Shringi, to stay away or not use these kind of powers in those situations.
Right, yeah, because it's the Brahman's duty to, it's just totally irresponsible of a Brahmin, to use powers like that to hurt someone. That's not what it's for. And especially, a kid, and there seems like there was something incomplete in his training, or maybe he just forgot, or his intelligence was covered over or something. And the other thing is, like, if he was trained so well to know a mantra, to curse someone to die, he must have also been trained in like just standard etiquette for how to receive a guest, so Shringi should have thought, oh, my father's in meditation, he wasn't able to receive the king. I should represent my father and be like, oh, please forgive my father. I think he's not aware that you've arrived. What can I do for you? Please take some water, please have a seat, be comfortable, but it was the opposite. It was almost like insult upon injury, that he's like, oh, my father didn't receive you properly. Good, let me insult you and curse you to die. It's like, what the heck? Where did that even come from? It's just like totally unreasonable, especially for Brahmins at that time. The culture was so strong that you wouldn't even think of doing something like that. Rasika.
So the other mistake that Shringi made was that even though it's true, Brahmanas are over the Kshatriyas and so forth culturally, Maharaj Parikshit was a great Vaishnava and one of the greatest kings amongst his lineage. Mm-hmm. And Shringi just didn't recognize that, he should have recognized that this is a great devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, should be respected regardless of whatever the Varnashram system is. Yeah.
So he was giving too much importance to his position in Varnashram and not understanding that a Vaishnava is actually above a Brahmin. Yeah. The position of a Vaishnava is higher than a Brahmin. Okay, so there are a lot of Shruti.
Along the same lines.
I was thinking of an instance when Brahmanas killed a king, and that was King Vena, and he was like really cruel. He was doing like heavy things. Then the Brahmanas were like, finally, like we have to get rid of this king. And it's like compared to that, it's such a juxtaposition. I guess that's the word.
Yeah.
Maybe. That Maharaj Parikshit was like this great devotee who just maybe lost his temper once, and it's like, oh, you must die now. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's such so extreme.
Yeah. And even with Vena, it's like they didn't kill him immediately. They tolerated him for such a long time. Then they went first and, tried to speak some sweet words to him, try to use some political diplomacy, flatter him, all that. And then finally, when he was just insulting them and being super horrific, as was his habit, then they said, okay, we've tried everything and nothing else works. We got to get rid of this guy. So, it was the totally last resort. After they discussed among themselves too, and they like came to a decision, like a group consensus on what to do. It wasn't just like, all right, yeah. Nitai.
I'm going to explain this, but I just thought, like, why did he curse? Why did he give him 7 days instead of saying, why doesn't he like die right now? He had the power to do that. Why give him 7 days?
Interesting, yeah.
Slow death is more agonizing.
Maybe, yeah. Huh? I don't know. I mean, he could have, like the Brahmins who killed Vena, that was immediate. They chanted the mantra and
More dramatic. He's trying to teach the Kshatriyas a lesson.
yeah, maybe he wants to, yeah, you never know what his motivation for that was. Okay, Rasika?
What's really significant about this whole story is that all of this was, Prabhupada brings this out, and it might even be in the verses, that it was all by the arrangement of the Lord, because now we have Srimad Bhagavatam. And also, it was time for Kali Yuga to kind of begin his ministry, so to speak. But because of all this happening, now we have Srimad Bhagavatam. It's very much along the lines of Arjuna, who, really shouldn't have become bewildered, but for our sake, he did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're going to hear right now in Prabhupada's purport. So let's go to text 28. Okay. Alabda trina bhumyadhir asampraptargya sunrita avagyatam ivatmanam manyamanas chikopaha alabdha trina bhumyadir asampraptargya sunrita avagyatam ivatmanam manyamanas chikopaha. Please chat. All right, let's do the word for word together. Alabda, having not received. Trina, seat of straw. Bhumi, place. Adi, and so on. Asamprapta, not properly received. Argya, water for reception. Sunrita, sweet words. Avagyatam, thus being neglected. Eva, like that. Atmanam, personally. Manyamana, thinking like that. Chukopa, became angry. Ha, in that way. Translation. The king, not received by any formal welcome by means of being offered a seat, place, water, and sweet addresses, considered himself neglected, and so thinking, he became angry. Let's read the purport. First paragraph. Nitai.
Law of reception in the codes of the Vedic principles states that even if an enemy is received at home, he must be received with all respects. He should not be given a chance to understand that he has come into the house of an enemy. Lord Krishna, accompanied by Arjuna and Bhima, approached Jarasandha in Magadha. The respectable enemies were given a royal reception by King Jarasandha. The guest enemy, namely Bhima, was to fight with Jarasandha, and yet they were given a grand reception. At night they used to sit down together as friends and guests, and in the day they used to fight, risking life and death. That was the law of reception. The reception law enjoins that a poor man who has nothing to offer his guests should be good enough to offer a straw mat for sitting, a glass of water for drinking, and some sweet words. Therefore, to receive a guest, either friend or foe, there is no expense. It is only a question of good manners.
So now you know how to receive. If someone comes to your house later when you're grihastas, or they come to the temple, which is Gauri-Tai's house, then you have to receive them nicely.
When Maharaj Parikshit entered the door of Shamika Rishi, he did not expect a royal reception by the Rishi because he knew that saints and Rishis are not materially rich men. But he never expected that a seat of straw, a glass of water, and some sweet words would be denied to him. He was not an ordinary guest, nor was he an enemy of the Rishi, and therefore the cold reception by the Rishi astonished the king greatly. As a matter of fact, the king was right to get angry with the Rishi when he needed a glass of water very badly. To become angry in such a grave situation was not unnatural for the king, but because the king himself was not less than a great saint, his becoming angry and taking action were astonishing. So it must be accepted that it was so ordained by the supreme will of the Lord. The king was a great devotee of the Lord, and the saint was also as good as the king, but by the will of the Lord, the circumstances were so created that they became ways to the king's becoming unattached to family connection and governmental activities, and thus becoming a completely surrendered soul unto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. The merciful Lord sometimes creates such awkward positions for his pure devotees in order to drag them towards himself from the mire of material existence. But outwardly, the situations appear to be frustrating to the devotees. The devotees of the Lord are always under the protection of the Lord, and in any condition, frustration or success, the Lord is the supreme guide for the devotees. The pure devotees, therefore, accept all conditions of frustration as blessings from the Lord.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, we were talking about all these anomalies. And Prabhupada says the only justification for Maharaj Parikshit's behavior is that it was ordained by the Lord. And we can say the only justification for Shringi's behavior, for Shamika Rishi's behavior, this was all happening according to the Lord's plan. And so he was inspiring them to act in unusual ways, in ways that are totally out of character, that they would never actually really do if it was just up to them. But somehow the Lord was just moving them in that way because he had his purposes to fulfill. So, and Prabhupada says here that, the merciful Lord sometimes creates awkward positions for his pure devotee in order to drag them towards himself from the mire of material existence. So did that ever happen to any of you? Have you had that experience that there was an awkward, frustrating situation in your life that was just so frustrating and so annoying and bewildering that you just were struggling and suffering, but that it brought you closer to Krishna. Everybody's had that experience. Would anyone like to share their experience? No, I don't want to talk about mine either. Oh, Rasika wants to. Go ahead, Rasika.
I don't mind sharing one of mine. It's happened many times, actually, but before I came to the devotees, my whole life blew up. I had left the monastery 6 years earlier and was living and doing a couple home-based businesses so I could continue my practice and continue searching. And all of a sudden, in a 2-week period, everything was so smooth, but in a 2-week period, my whole life blew up and everything was gone. The money, 2 home-based businesses, all my friends took off, all my business associates took off, and I was homeless and all the money gone. And I can't even explain to you how it all happened. It was just incredible. And I didn't know what was happening. And I told the Lord, I'm done. I want to go to the next life, please. I'm done. You have to show me which way to go. And it was within a week that I met the devotees and everything became absolutely clear why I went through all of that, because I never would have moved into the temple and began to practice Krishna consciousness, which has been the greatest boon of my life. I mean, I'm happier than I've ever been.
Great. Wow. Very nice story. Thank you. Advaita?
I want to share. I may ask a question in this regard.
Sure.
In a sense, this begs a question. I can understand when we are outside of Krishna consciousness for this to be an impetus, but once we step on this royal path, how can we determine, is this going to drag me from the mire of material existence? Or is this just a test? Like, example of Prabhupada, he was struggling that first year, but he just, kept going. He was looking for the next boat to India, also on a brink of going back, but somehow he persevered. Thank God. And so how do we determine? Is this going to contribute to my Krishna consciousness or not?
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you raised, because one thing is that we get frustrated with material life and come to Krishna consciousness, that's clear. But after coming to Krishna consciousness, it still happens, And we see, Parikshit Maharaj is a Mahabhagavat. He's already a pure devotee of the Lord. He saw Krishna, his whole life was, looking for Krishna. And still he has to undergo this frustrating situation. So yeah, this happened to Srila Prabhupada a number of times, right? His business failed, his warehouse got burnt down, one of his workers stole everything, and so that collapsed. His family, his wife was not supportive, his sons were not supportive, he's frustrated in his family life. Then he left there, he went to Vrindavan, he was trying to print his books and trying to distribute books. He got knocked down by a cow and stabbed with the horn of a cow, and he's lying on the ground, dying of heat stroke in the dust, on the side of some road in India, and nobody's coming to help him. And then he comes to America, and then it's he gets his typewriter. He only had a few possessions, and he got his typewriter stolen. His room got broken into. He was homeless, wondering, so many frustrating. So why does it keep happening? Why doesn't it? It's okay, frustrate your material life, but when you're trying to serve Krishna, then Krishna should just support, give you everything. Prabhupada should just stepped off that plane and people were like, wow, sadhu, can we help you? Can I give you money? You need a place to stay? No, he didn't get any of that. He was really struggling. So I was thinking that, of course, Srila Prabhupada was a devotee from birth. There's no doubt about that. He came from the spiritual world. So it's not that he needed to be purified or needed to become detached in one sense. But at the same time, we see how Krishna, he does these things to move his devotees. They're in a certain situation, and it's like, okay, time to move to another situation. And then, Srila Prabhupada was there in Butler, Pennsylvania, nothing was happening. So then he moved to New York, and then he was in the, staying with that Mayavadi, that impersonal, I don't know if he was a Mayavadi, but Dr. Mishra, he was definitely an impersonalist. And so he wasn't able to speak, so he was frustrated. Then he went to another place, and Prabhupada was just, Krishna was just moving him. And also there was almost like a sense of, bringing about a sense of detachment from what he had envisioned as success. Because when Prabhupada came, he had a certain vision of how he wanted to achieve success in the USA. He wanted to talk to important people, government officials, professors, influencers. But Krishna just totally smashed that whole thing and frustrated him, and then the people that Krishna wanted him to speak to were the down and outs, like starving students and artists and musicians and hippies on the Bowery, So sometimes Krishna will frustrate us. We're trying to serve him in a certain way, and he'll frustrate us because he wants us to serve him in another way. So we need to be like a little detached from what we're doing, how we're doing it, where we're doing it, who we're doing it with. And we just have to be open to be like used as instruments in Krishna's service in any situation, for any purpose, And even see what's happening with Maharaj Parikshit here is that he's a devotee, he's a great king. One would think, why would Krishna want him to die? Doesn't Krishna want, this whole battle of Kurukshetra was fought to put Yudhisthira on the throne so that the world could be ruled by a devotee king for the benefit of humanity. And now you've got his direct descendant, Parikshit Maharaj, who's the best devotee on the planet, ruling the planet. What better situation could there be for Krishna consciousness? Isn't that like the best thing, the best situation for like Krishna to achieve his mission in this world, to reestablish religious principles, maintain dharma, deliver the pious, annihilate the miscreants? Isn't that what Krishna wants? So why would he get rid of that person, when he's in the prime of his life, he was a young man. So it doesn't make sense, right? But then Srila Prabhupada writes back in the purport to text 2425, he says, the Supreme Lord is so kind to his pure devotees that in proper time, he calls such devotees up to him and thus creates an auspicious circumstance for the devotee. So the thing is that Parikshit Maharaj was such a good devotee that Krishna was missing him. Krishna was like, you're doing a great job there. You've been looking for me your whole life. And I want you to come back home now. I'm going to cry. So Krishna, he just made this situation to enable Maharaj Parikshit to go back to Godhead. And Krishna's he's not worried. Krishna can put another king in place. Everything can be fine. That's not a problem for Krishna. The problem is for Krishna, it's all about his relationships, his devotees, bringing his devotees closer to him. So that's Krishna's main priority. And so Prabhupada writes here in this purport, one has to give up all attachment for worldly relations before one is able to go back to Godhead. And thus when a devotee is too much absorbed in worldly affairs, the Lord creates a situation to cause indifference. So Parikshit was very responsible in managing the state. And he was absorbed in that was his service. And he was doing his dharma. But Krishna didn't like that he was too absorbed in it. He said that, you're going to get too absorbed in managing and administrating and, dealing with situations in the governance. I want you to just let it go, don't go there. I want you to just be focused on me. So he created a situation where he had to just renounce it all, just give it all up. And then another purpose that Krishna was, so one purpose was to call Maharaj Parikshit back home, back to Godhead. And for that to happen, he had to be detached. So the 7 days is like, it gives him some time to wrap everything up, to make the arrangements for the next king to take over, and to, just file away all of his mundane responsibilities nicely, and then to focus, on hearing, because he needed to adjust his consciousness. It's just like when you go from one place to another, you need to like reorient your consciousness to the mood of the place. So he's like, okay, I was absorbed in my kingly duties. Now I need to reorient my consciousness to focus totally just on Krishna. So then, this was also the will of Krishna, that he had 7 days to do that. He had some time. So then he could leave the kingdom nicely, wrap all that up responsibly, go to another place, meet a pure devotee, and hear about Krishna, just absorb himself in Krishna Katha to prepare his mind for going back to Godhead. And in doing that, that also fulfilled another one of Krishna's purposes, which was to manifest Srimad Bhagavatam, as Rasika was saying. And Prabhupada writes, Maharaj Parikshit was to become the medium for the revelation of Srimad Bhagavatam by Lord Sri Krishna, just as his grandfather Arjuna was the medium for the Bhagavad Gita. And it's a very analogous situation, because there's this parallel that Prabhupada brings out. He says, had Arjuna not been taken up with an illusion of family affection by the will of the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita would not have been spoken by the Lord himself for the good of all concerned. So if Arjuna hadn't been in Maya, basically, if he hadn't had mundane consciousness, if he hadn't been totally frustrated and bewildered on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the Bhagavad Gita wouldn't have been spoken. So similarly, he says, had Maharaj Parikshit not been fatigued, hungry, and thirsty at this time, Srimad Bhagavatam would not have been spoken by Shukadeva Goswami. So if he hadn't been fatigued, and it says, Prabhupada makes the point later that that this was unprecedented, that just due to hunger and thirst, the king would become angry. Because he said that even as a child in the womb, he wasn't disturbed by the Brahmastra. Brahmastra is like the most difficult situation. If you're like a Brahmastra bearing down on you, burning your body into a cinder. And still Maharaj Parikshit, even as a child, baby, unborn baby, he wasn't disturbed. He was just like peacefully, just like meditating on Krishna. So why was he not peacefully meditating on Krishna when he was hungry and thirsty and not getting his water? So Prabhupada says that, this was all so that the Bhagavatam could be spoken for the benefit of us. And then there's another purpose, and that is to usher in Kali Yuga. Because the yugas and the degradation of the age, that's also according to Krishna's plan. Kali Yuga has to happen. Krishna wants Kali Yuga to happen. It's not that this is something that Kali comes and does something against the will of Krishna. Krishna actually empowers Kali to come, and he gives authority to Maya, Mahamaya, to cover people and bewilder people. And so Kali Yuga has to come about, and it's not going to come about while Maharaj Parikshit's on the planet. So basically he has to bring Maharaj Parikshit back home, back to Godhead, so that Kali Yuga can manifest. And the first manifestation of Kali Yuga is what? It's right here in this pastime. The Brahmanas. So the Brahmanas becoming arrogant and thinking that we're like the what? Creme de la creme, and everybody else is just low, and they need to just listen to us and serve us. And so this, they're just like useless peasants. And so, the corruption of the Brahminical order, because if the Brahmin class is strong and righteous and pure, and they're teaching people about religious principles, then Kali also can't, enter into society. So the first thing that Kali does by the will of Krishna is to contaminate the consciousness of the Brahmins and bring about the downfall of the Brahminical order. And then the rest of the lower classes, then they have very little hope. And actually Shamika Rishi, when he foresees this happening, so when he realizes what happened, he's very ashamed of his own negligence, of his son's behavior, and he preaches to Shringi, and he tells Shringi, like, what you've done is really, really bad. He says, you should have received him nicely. He should have never been condemned. Actually, he says that Maharaj Pariksha is the best of the human beings. You've behaved sinfully, my dear son. Yeah. And then Shamika Rishi goes on to instruct his son about the importance of the monarch. He says that the king is actually very important. You're thinking that he's lower, you're thinking he's like a dog or a crow or whatever, but you need to know that it's the king that protects everybody else so that we can do our religious duties peacefully. If it wasn't for the king, we'd have, thieves and rogues and miscreants and all kinds of people disturbing us all the time and disturbing everybody else too. And we actually need the kings. We depend on the protection of the kings. And he said that now there's going to be a great social disruption. People are going to be killed and injured. Animals and women will be stolen. And for all these sins, we shall be responsible. This is our fault. He's taking full responsibility for the consequences of the ills of society because of what his son has done. So yeah, Prabhupada writes, the sage rightly takes responsibility of the Brahmins as a community for killing monarchical government and thus giving an opportunity for the so-called Democrats who are plunderers of wealth. And then Prabhupada goes on to really bash democracy. And then Shamiki says, at that time, the people in general will fall systematically from the path of progressive civilization. They will be more attracted to economic development for sense gratification. And as a result, there will be an unwanted population on the level of dogs and monkeys. So he's foreseeing the whole downfall of human society because of what his son has done. And specifically in relation to Maharaj Pariksha, because he's a devotee, you've offended a Vaishnava, as if it wasn't, bad enough. So, yeah. And then, he says that the devotee of the Lord, even though he may not be a Brahmin, is more powerful than a Brahmin. But a powerful devotee never misuses the power for personal benefit. Whatever power the devotee may have is always utilized in the service toward the Lord and his devotees only. So that was an instruction for Shringi, like, you should use your powers in the service of the Lord, not to hurt others. And Maharaj Parikshit, he was also powerful because he was a devotee. Probably he was more powerful than a Brahmin. So he could have counteracted the curse. He could have said, all right, Krishna, please, counteract this. But he didn't. And Shamika Rishi also, he could have counteracted it, but he didn't. Even Shringi could have counteracted the curse when he's instructed by his father about how he'd done wrong, how he was sinful and how he was inappropriate and it was offensive. Nobody counteracted the curse because they all understood that it was the will of the Lord and they didn't want to interfere with the will of the Lord. So that's like the level of consciousness of these personalities. So yeah, it's very amazing. Prabhupada writes here, Maharaj Parikshit also did not mind the curse offered to him by the foolish Brahmin. On the contrary, he took full advantage of the awkward situation, and by the great will of the Lord, Maharaj Parikshit achieved the highest perfection of life through the grace of Srila Shukadev Goswami. Actually, it was the desire of the Lord, and Maharaj Parikshit, Rishi Shamika, and his son Shringi were all instrumental in fulfilling the desire of the Lord. So none of them were put into difficulty because everything was done in relation with the Supreme Person. So, yeah, I just thought it was interesting how, Krishna has his purposes, and sometimes we think that things are happening, that we are controlling things, or that other people are controlling things, and that we're victims, and that the world is the way it is because, there are cruel people and vicious people and, power-hungry people and whatever, and we kind of like blame people, or we blame ourselves, or we blame the situation. Actually, not a blade of grass moves, but by the will of the Lord. And Krishna is all good, but sometimes he creates situations which seem bad, which seem frustrating, which seem counterproductive to religious principles, for a higher purpose, which he knows we may not know. We may realize it later, or if someone has a lot of insight, they may have, the clarity and intelligence to be able to, if they have spiritual vision, they can understand what's happening. But often we can't understand situations, we become bewildered. But we have to have faith that even though it looks like totally insane, like a devotee does something totally like nuts, very out of character, unprecedented, anomalous, we have to have faith that Krishna is still in control, and that everything is happening for a purpose, and we need to trust Krishna, have faith in Krishna, that it's all going to be good. Somebody once said that in Krishna consciousness, there are always only happy endings. So it means that if you're not happy, it means it hasn't ended yet. Just be patient, persevere, keep chanting your 16 rounds, following the principles, trying to be a nice devotee, serving the Vaishnavas, everything's going to be all right. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Oh, questions. Jonathan.
Krishna. I think you just answered it, but my question is, if Krishna is going to infiltrate the Brahminical order with like whatever FBI plants or lizard people plants or whatever, and it's all like doomed anyway, then what's the point in us trying? Or should we just go ahead and just, get a jump start and bring it down so we can get closer to the end goal?
Trying to be Brahminical, if the Brahmins are like doomed? Yeah. Actually, it's mentioned here about Shringi, is that, this is an interesting point, is that Prabhupada says that some of the demons that Krishna killed when he was present, some of them got liberated, went to Brahman, some of them like Putana went to Goloka, but some of them took birth again. And Krishna arranged that they took birth in Brahmin families so that they could have a chance to reform themselves. And he says that Shringi was one of them. Shringi was a demon in his last life, and he got killed by Krishna. And Krishna, because he was purified by contact with Krishna, then Krishna wanted to give him a best opportunity by taking birth in a Brahmin family. But unfortunately, his demoniac propensities from his previous life resurfaced and caused him to act demoniacally in this situation by the will of the Lord. So, yeah. So, and he says that, people who take birth in devotee families or in Brahmin families nowadays, they get the best chance, but they should understand that they're coming from a background which is not necessarily Brahminical or Vaishnava, and so they need to be very careful. That, okay, you took birth in a devotee family, that's great, you've got a fantastic opportunity to perfect your life and go back to Godhead, but just keep in mind that you still have some stuff, from your previous life that can come up, and you need to be careful to check that. Don't think that you're home free yet. So,
can I say something?
But we can still try to be Vaishnava. We still need to try. Prabhupada wanted to reestablish a Brahminical class to give guidance to humanity. So we still need to try because Prabhupada wanted that. So it can be possible.
Yeah, about Prabhupada does call democracy demon crazy, but he wasn't for Marxist philosophy either. He talks badly about that also. He didn't want a dictatorship or an autocracy. He wanted advisors to the leader of a society. Brahmins and Vajrayana says also some of the other section.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're pro-Marxist or something like that, because he said demon crazy. He talks bad about Marxist
Yeah,
philosophy
society needs
also.
leaders. You need philosophical leaders,
With
religious
guidance.
leaders to guide the rest. I guess last thing, Christina?
I have an analogy in response to Jonathan's question. Okay, so Jonathan, if you're going to play basketball, the goal of basketball is to get the ball through the hoop, right? So what stops you from just going to the court at midnight when nobody else is around, getting a ladder, taking the basketball and just putting the ball through the hoop a bunch of times? That's not how you play basketball, right? The point, even though the goal is to get the ball in the basket, the purpose of basketball is to try to do it by the rules so that you have fun, so that you have that experience of doing it by the rules, and then you get, Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or whatever, you have these, amazing experiences, right? So that's what I would say to answer your question.
Should we take Bruce? Bruce.
Hare Krishna. I just have a simple question. How long ago was Maharaj Parikshit here?
Oh, that was a long time ago. It was at the very beginning of Kali Yuga, so like, yeah, something like 5,000 years ago or a little less. A lot of things happened 5,000 years ago. A lot of very important things. Kartikeya. Actually, I think like Krishna. Oh, sorry. Okay, last.
Yeah, so everything was Krishna's arrangement. Even the fact that Shringi offended a Vaishnava. So, what about when I offend a Vaishnava? Is that Krishna's arrangement?
A good question. Yeah. Prabhu, that was so rude. Well, Krishna controls everything. He inspired me. I don't know what his purpose was, but we'll find out later. Just know that this is all for your good. No, it doesn't work like that. So, yeah. No, we'll still get, I mean, it actually may be, but we're still going to get the reaction for Vaishnava Aparad. And actually, it's mentioned here that Krishna engaged Shringi, who was a boy, in making the offense so that he wouldn't have to suffer too much. Because if an adult had done what Shringi did, he would have been done. Yeah. So it's specifically mentioned that Krishna chose this child because child doesn't get so much reaction because they're innocent and they're, just like nowadays, like if a child breaks the law, they might get like, a little bit of caution or whatever. But if an adult does it, it's like they go to jail. So, yeah. So if you, being an adult, offend a devotee, then you're not going to get off the hook the way Shringi did, even if it was the will of the Lord. But chances are it wasn't.
Not on that, we have that verse about being more humble than a blade of grass, taller than a tree.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be like, so I'm going to do all this too because you're a devotee. You're supposed to be more tolerant than a tree.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. It's
Right.
like we are
Other way
supposed
around.
other way around.
Yeah.
You can't just misuse that verse and be like, you are supposed to be tolerant. So let me just dump all my offenses on.
Yeah. It's a tendency to twist a lot of things in the Shastras for our own advantage. So we have to, it's kind of like a demoniac mentality. Is what the demons do is they actually use Shastra, they use the Vedas to get power to harm people. So we have to be, as devotees, we have to be very careful not to use our scriptures in ways to, justify. Thank you. Justify our misdoings, misdeeds, and harm others, because that scope is there for that. So we have to not, otherwise we're acting demoniacally and we will end up getting the consequences that demons get. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol.